Let's look at responses to assess risks at the assertion level. In the previous video, we looked at the responses to assess risks at the financial statement level. So for the assertion level here, you look at individual items, like you deal with sales alone, receivables alone, inventory. So the auditor has to perform further audit procedures at the assertion level. So here, further audit procedures are designed in accordance with the audit approach that is adopted. And there are two types of audit procedures that are performed to collect evidence at the assertion level, and that is test of controls and then substantive procedures. So in this video, we are going to first look at the test of controls. So we start with test of controls. So test of controls are audit procedures designed to evaluate the operating effectiveness of controls in preventing, detecting, and then correcting misstatements at the assertion level. So as you see, test of controls, like they are testing controls, and we said controls are like the processes that were designed in the organization, so that the organization can be able to prevent, detect, and correct misstatements. So for test of controls, you're testing whether those controls that were put in place actually work like the way they are supposed to work. Like in case they said that employees are supposed to be paid maybe through the bank and on this date by this person, like does it work like that? That's what we call test of controls. They are designed to evaluate the operating effectiveness of controls in preventing, detecting, and correcting material misstatements at the assertion level. When risk assessment shows that controls are expected to operate effectively, then the auditor designs and performs the test of controls to obtain sufficient appropriate evidence, or to make sure that the controls are operating effectively. And tests of controls are also performed when it's not possible to obtain sufficient appropriate evidence simply by using substantive procedures. So substantive procedures, for them, they are used to detect material misstatements. Yeah. So the difference between substantive procedures and test of controls test the effectiveness of controls. But then substantive procedures are used to detect material misstatements. So test of controls are also performed when it's not possible to obtain sufficient appropriate evidence simply by using substantive procedures. For example, when an entity conducts its business using IT systems which do not produce documentations of transactions, like in case a transaction takes place, receipts are not given. Yeah, so test of controls can work where substantive procedures can't work. And in carrying out test of controls, auditors use inquiry, like they inquire from maybe employees, management, things like that. So auditors use inquiry, reperformance, like they do what was done before, like in case employees are supposed to be paid through the bank and all that, like on that particular date, so they do it again to see if it's what actually takes place. Or if they say maybe when a sale is made, we record here and there and there, so the auditor will have to reperform that to see if it is actually true. Then they also use inspection. They inspect the records and physical assets. For example, if an entity carries out a year-end inventory count, like they count inventory at the end of the financial year. So controls over the inventory count can only be tested at the year end. Like the process that they go through to count inventory can only be tested at the end of the financial year, since inventory is counted at the end of the financial year. And for other controls that operate all year round, like throughout the year, the auditor will need to test those controls to see whether they have been effective throughout the whole period. And for controls that were tested in the prior audits, like in the previous audits, maybe the previous financial year, the auditor may choose to rely on that evidence for their effectiveness. Like the auditor can decide not to test them again since they were tested in the previous period. And then for this case, the auditor should obtain evidence about any changes. Like in case any changes were made, the auditor will have to test the controls. To test the controls if they have changed, but if they have not changed, the auditor can decide to rely on information from the previous audits. Then a control should be tested for effectiveness at least once in every 3 audits. And then if there is any significant risk, like a risk that needs special attention, the auditor should not rely on testing done in the previous years, but should perform testing in the current year. For example, the risk of fraud. Just because there was no fraud the previous year doesn't mean that there was no fraud this year. Yes, so if there is a significant risk, the auditor should not rely on testing done in the previous years or prior years, but should perform testing in the current year. So that is a brief introduction on test of controls.